This is Michael Clara, coming to you from Salt Lake City, Utah, with update number 9 to the Spencer Cox signature list cover-up. What I want to review in this update is, number 1, tie up some loose ends from this series of videos that I've been doing since August. And really the first thing to tie up is the fact that when this series started, and the first one was titled Spencer Cox Signature List Cover-Up. The cover-up at the time was the fact that the Attorney General's office here in the state of Utah was conducting an investigation into the signature list. And I submitted a grammar request to get that information, and the grammar request was denied on the basis that no records existed. And then when I appealed it to the Attorney General's office, Daniel Burton responded, who's a counsel for the Attorney General's office, that they're not even conducting an investigation into the Cox signature list, Governor Cox's signature list. So and then when I appealed it to the State Records Committee following the law, they wouldn't even schedule it for a hearing. So that was my first indication that the fix was in on a much wider basis. And it really caught my attention, and I started digging further. And that's what these series of updates has been about. However, a recent update, I was able to point out that an audit that was released by the legislative auditors on just a couple of weeks ago on October 15th disclosed that the Attorney General's office is indeed conducting an investigation into the Cox signature list. So we'll continue to try to find out what is the whole reason of trying to cover this up. It was so bizarre. And that's what I want to cover here. The number 2 part of this review is there's another term for it, but the one that comes to mind, it's called the back of the house. And basically what that means is that an example I can give, when I was in law enforcement, I would work overtime assignments in plain clothes at hotels. And they would hire off-duty police officers to provide security for the hotel. People like me that do security or housekeeping, or you work at a restaurant, everybody goes in through a different door, typically where the docks are at, in the back of the hotel. And then you have your own hallways. You have a whole different world going on how to keep that place running, the hotel, and maintenance and things of that nature, and security, housekeeping, all those things are monitored and are managed and function in the back of the house. So what I want to try to point out is give you a glimpse of what I've learned with other people looking into this over the last since May of this year, what we've learned about the workings of the back of the house in terms of how the governor's people have been operating in terms of this signature verification. One of my underlining themes in this presentation is the fact that the executive branch, which is the office of the lieutenant governor, where they are at, and you have here elections. This is where Ryan Calley's at. The lieutenant governor's office, in my opinion, which is part of the executive branch, has made a mockery of the legislative branch. And you'll see what I mean by that. Now what I want to do is shift gears here, and let's talk about the signature verification law and how that came into existence. And I'm going to show you a series of May 18th, this is from 2022, October 19th. These are interim committee presentations. And I want to show you at least give you an idea of the level of work that had to go into this to create this law, and how the interim committee, they study it, they get attorneys on it, and they craft this law on how signatures are going to be verified. And this is one committee hearing. I don't think I put the Senate committee hearing in here, but let's go ahead and listen in up until this point.
Okay, next on the list is agenda number 5, signature verification requirements. We are going to start with Tom Vaughn, Associate General Counsel.
Thank you. Just a brief introduction of this next topic. As you're aware, there are multiple provisions in the election code currently that require the use of citizen petitions in order to get those legal processes moving. The ones that are most familiar are candidacy petitions and initiative and referendum petitions, but we have several others, and there are several others, and the concern that the elections office wants to come and talk about today is the fact that we really don't have a uniform system of how these petitions are verified and the signatures on them. It's really fleshed out when it comes to initiatives and referenda, but not for other things. And so they'll be making a presentation on that subject and have a proposal for that.
Okay, Ryan, are you in the house? Ryan Cowley?
Yes, I am here.
Oh, they're online. Okay.
Yeah, we're online. And Hayden Loftus will also be a panelist as well. He'll present shortly after me from our office. But basically what we've noticed is
Go ahead and officially introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so I'm Ryan Cowley. I'm the Director of Elections in the Lieutenant Governor's Office. Thank you for allowing me to be here. So basically what we've noticed is over the last few years, in regards to like initiative, referenda, we've done a lot of work in those areas. And even in candidate petition packets, we've done a great job of coming up with some really good standards for signature verification that the county clerks use and the state uses when we're verifying those. But what we've noticed too is that there's still a lot of areas. There's over 12 different types of petitions that we've identified in the code. And a lot of those sections of code don't really address what criteria we're supposed to use for signature verification. And so what we'd like to do is create one section of code that would reside outside of all of these other different areas that would have the standards that we use to do it. So are we using first name, similar name, is the date of birth required in the petition, those kind of things. We have just one place that would house the criteria.
Thank you. Okay, Representative Briscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This could be for Hayden. I'm trying to understand this chart. So I'm looking across the top. Minor spelling differences between name on petition and name on register. So one way of interpreting the X's in your first 5 columns is that the clerk is allowed to do that. Is that what the X means? That for a state initiative, a county clerk is allowed to look at minor spelling differences and to judge whether or not these are the same individual. Is that what that X means?
Yes, so what we're looking at is an X as if it's contained in the code section for that petition. So for state initiatives, state referenda, local initiatives, and local referenda, as well as partisan candidates, they are allowed to verify a signature if that is found with the signatures. Essentially, those first, I think it's the first 5, fall under what the definition of substantially similar name means in code. The exact code reference, which would be 20A7 206.31A Roman numeral I, is the given name and surname shown on the petition, or both contain only minor spelling differences when compared to the given name and surname shown on the official register. So that is an allowance for a county clerk to verify a signature.
But the fact that the next 7 columns do not have an X, does that indicate that a clerk cannot make that judgment about minor spelling differences? Because
Correct.
The X is lacking?
Yes, it would not be in that code section for that petition.
So if I'm understanding correctly, Mr. Chair, the proposal is that we standardize and bring all of this into one section. So
Correct.
that it's all in one place, and that anyone dealing with any verification of signatures, there's one set of rules, one ring to rule them all, I suppose.
Yes, exactly.
There'll be one code section to rule them all. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, no, this has been a bill that's really been 3 years,
Yeah.
3 years in the making. So it's good to finally see it at this point. I think there's been a lot of changes and improvements. And really the main purpose of this bill is to create more standardization across the counties and how they're verifying signatures and also how they're reporting those numbers at the end of the election.
Thank you. Representative Roner.
I just would like some clarification. If I'm registered as, private, and
As private voters aren't allowed to be disclosed to the general public. But for example, if a political party or a candidate were to request that list and they were granted access to it, then they would get those private voters. So the privacy laws aren't affected by what we're doing in this bill.
but the parties could get the list, even though I'm private.
Private, yes. Withheld, no. So there's 3 categories of voters
Right.
in Utah. The withheld, only somebody who is acting in their official capacity as a government employee is able to access the private voter or the withheld voter list. Private voters, the political parties, other people have access to that, but the general public does not. And then obviously the rest of the voters are in that public category. So hopefully that helps clarify that.
Thank you very much.
All right, having exhausted public comment or committee comment, we'll go to the
Okay, now we're moving on to agenda number 8, draft legislation petition amendments. And we will turn the time over to Mr. Cipriano to go over the bill for us.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. This bill it's quite lengthy, and it's doing a couple of different things. First and foremost, the bill adds a new section of code that creates a uniform process for verifying signatures on statewide and local initiative and referenda petitions. The bill does is, within the code, voters can sign petitions to do several different types of things in addition to initiative and referenda. These include petitions to consolidate 2 or more municipalities, to incorporate a municipality, for adjoining counties to become a single county, for the creation of a new school district, for 2 or more school districts to unite into a single school district, among others. So the bill gathers all of these different petitions that exist within the code, and it takes them and it says when one of these petitions occurs to use the new section of code as the provision within the code to verify the signatures on that petition. And it also applies the structure in the...
Roner, HB 68, petition amendments. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. HB 68 was brought to the interim Government Ops Committee by the Lieutenant Governor's Office during the interim, and I served on the Government Ops at that time and took on this House bill. It passed out of committee unanimously, and this...
Go ahead, Ryan.
So I'm Ryan Cowley, Director of Elections in the Lieutenant Governor's Office. And this was a bill that we brought to the interim for the committee to study. And what we really found is we identified 12 different types of petitions in code that use registered voter as kind of the standard that they could sign. And I think the drafting attorney actually found a few more as he dug into code. There's a lot of different types of petitions. And what's happened over the years is each of those different types of petitions have been modified, and some of them had updates to what is a valid signature, what isn't. What we are trying to do is set a standard in one place in the code for all of these petitions that defines what is a valid signature. And that criteria is things like they're a legal voter, they reside in the district, that their name matches, the address matches, their signature matches, or a combination of those things with dates of birth. And those things have been well established in some areas of the code. We just wanted that to be the standard so that every petition that either comes to our office or to the county clerk's office has that set standard.
So you notice I threw in there the testimony of Ryan Cowley and his hypocrisy. And it just kind of shows the duplicitous nature of the people that work in the Lieutenant Governor's office and what we've been having to deal with and just trying to get information from them. Information that we're entitled to. And you saw this graph here, which is, pretty interesting that this is the kind of stuff they were doing, which I think is a very positive thing, that they were, the process that they went through. But I'm going to show you how they end up, in my opinion, just spitting in the face of the legislature in terms of how they applied this law because it had to do with their boss. So what I want to just review here with you real quick is the signature gathering process. That over here to the left is what the petition looks like. And the Spencer Cox, I think it was right under $300,000 that he spent on gathering ink. And this is owned by Spencer Stokes and Leatham is this other, Tanner Leatham, I think is his name. And that's who they hired. And then this just shows a simple graph of how the governor and his people are the ones that turn it in to the Davis County Clerk, because that's who they had a contract with, or the lieutenant governor's office did. So now let's look at the actual law. And one of the things I want to highlight here is that the verify signatures on nomination petitions in a transparent and orderly manner. So those words are very important, in my opinion, because we'll see how that ends up not happening at all. And then you see down here it says, that the assistance of the county clerk is applicable. Use the procedures described in section 20A-1-1002. And that's the law that was created out of those hearings that we just listened to, in the interim and the hearing finally in that session of 2023. This is a law that came up. Now, I want you to see the words here, each. Let me highlight those for you. And the word declare. That the clerk shall declare the signature valid or invalid. And as they go through this process, that declaration of the clerk is going to happen as they enter that information into the statewide voter registration system. And what that is, let me just emphasize this, that this is the order in this law. It says that the order is that the verification, you verify the name first, verify the address, verify the age, register, are they registered to vote, registered under correct party affiliation, living in the correct district. In this case, we're looking at Governor Cox. So as long as they live in Utah, they're fine. I think he had probably under 5 or something like that actually lived out of state and stuff, but this caught it, and then number 7 is validation of actual signature. The way this law is written, it's very particular about, and remember the previous one that I pointed out said an orderly and transparent manner. Well, orderly is taken care of by doing it in the order that the law says that this has to be done. And transparent manner is manifested down here, that because this information is inputted into the statewide voter registration system, and then we could see it. We know what the results are. And that's how transparent and orderly comes to pass as required by the law. Now, in Utah, we have VISTA, which is a voter information and state tracking application. And this is how it works. I got this graph out of an audit from 3 years ago from the legislative auditors. And so they created this graph to show how VISTA works. And it says here, upload and potential matches from various sources. And so here's another graph that just kind of talks about, what it can do, how the clerks will maintain the information in it. And one of the other things that happens is, like they say here, VISTA enables voter management across county lines and provides central controls over ballot security. And it says here on the bottom, using a central database can help control voting activity in real time, making it very difficult to vote more than once. So what happens is your ballot gets turned in. The system documents that, and they know that. That way, if you got 2 ballots or something like that, or somebody forges one or something, they know that you already voted. It also works for signatures. And so what happens is as they input the signatures, the list into the system, first of all, this system lets them know right away, what information is accurate and what's not. And they input your information into that system, and then this is what comes out. You can get that. That's how they end up with these lists of, is the signature valid, is it invalid, and then these numbers up here are what Ryan Cowley gave to Natalie Clausen back in June. Now let's jump into the audit as it pertains to what I've just talked about. The legislative audit tells us that the lieutenant governor is the filing officer over statewide races, and it is chosen to contract with Davis County Clerk to verify signatures on statewide races. Now, remember the law and the orderly part of the law. It says the verification of personal information acts as a control for signature verification. And they say here, before validating a signature, election workers must verify that signers are registered to vote in Utah, registered under the correct party affiliation for the candidate collecting signatures, living in the district that matches the candidate collecting signatures. If these requirements are met, Utah code stipulates that election workers must also verify certain personal information on the petition packet with information in Vista before verifying a signature. So I want to emphasize that sounds pretty simple, right? You're going to see why I'm emphasizing it in a second. They go on in this illustration to say that the verification of a signer's name, address, or age act as a control before a signature can be verified. So here again, we're being told that this personal information, and then they even graph it here, that has to be done before you even look at the signature. But here's the problem. When we start looking into the audit, these are the red flags that I saw in the audit, that after verifying personal information outlined on the previous page, election workers then verify signatures. Some packets had no signatures rejected, other packets had a few, but a small number of packets had a disproportionate number of signatures rejected and were suspected of potential concerns with the signature gatherer. In these instances, the Davis County Clerk's office removed the packet from the verification process and sent it to the Lieutenant Governor's office. The Lieutenant Governor's office then reviewed the packet and determined whether to send it to the Office of the Attorney General for further review. So what's concerning about that is there is no provision in the law to remove packets from the verification process. And that's what these auditors said that these guys did. You can't do that because in some cases I've heard people say that these signatures are your vote, or like a vote, they're like a ballot. And we would never do that to ballots. We wouldn't allow them to just pull ballots because they think something's wrong with it. And the way the law is, remember, is you look at all that personal information. Well, when you don't just look at it, you're inputting it into the Vista system. So that's fine. If they see that signatures were bad, or they think they're fraudulent, or they determine that they're invalid, under law, they had a duty to declare it. And the way they declare it is by inputting it into the Vista system. And this is how we get the orderly and transparent application of the law, which these guys didn't do. The auditors go on to say, the Lieutenant Governor's office has contracted with Davis County Clerk to verify the signatures on all candidate petitions for statewide offices. Earlier this year, when reviewing petition packets, the Davis County Clerk office flagged some packets for having many non-matching signatures. They submitted those packets to the Lieutenant Governor's office for further review, and then potential submission to the Attorney General's office for review. So the other thing I hope you guys caught is we're not just talking about the Lieutenant Governor. This is the candidate Lieutenant Governor. So basically what happened was the candidate Lieutenant Governor or the candidate governor submits their signatures to the Davis County Clerk, and the Davis County Clerk sends them back to the candidate without any kind of accountability or documenting the fact that these signatures even existed, because we didn't know about them until 3 weeks ago when this audit came out. And they go on to say here on the bottom that the following packets were not included in our sample testing to verify Davis County Clerk's office decision. Packets that the Davis County Clerk office flagged for having many non-matching signatures and were subsequently sent to the Attorney General's office. They go on to say that now this is how it starts affecting the numbers. The numbers here that submitted, that Cox had submitted an additional 492 signatures that the Davis County Clerk could have reviewed. But look at the footnote. There may be more signatures that could be added to these totals from the packets at the office of the Attorney General. We do not include them in this count as they are still under review. So, but what I want you to understand here is when I'm reading this this audit, there are packets that they sent to. So let me say this way: the clerk sends packets back to the lieutenant governor's office, and they decide they're the candidate. They decide if they're going to send some to the attorney general's office, but we don't have any indication about what happens to the ones they decided not to send. Did they send those back to the clerk? Did it get counted or not get counted? But here's what we do know. That these are the numbers that we have for Cox, and they tell us here. The numbers in this figure do not include the signatures and packets that were submitted to the Office of the Attorney General for further review. The Davis County Clerk's office completely removed those packets and signatures from the count of submitted and reviewed signatures for each candidate. And what I'm saying is that's illegal. And this is why I spent time to show you what, and I only showed you a fraction of what they did in terms of these attorneys going through these hearings and for what? Because these guys don't even follow the process. And you saw McKenzie, who is the Davis County Clerk, was even there testifying right there with, and we're talking about Ryan Cowley, who's in the Lieutenant Governor's office, and Brian McKenzie, who's the Davis County Clerk, are the ones bastardizing this law that they work so hard to get done and to get passed. They're not even following it. There is nothing in the law, and especially there's a conflict of interest here with the Lieutenant Governor's office. Now, go back to that little game they were playing with me, and that's not just with me when they weren't giving me the list. Other people, I could do a whole update on just what other people went through. I just showed you what I went through, and I have the paperwork for the other people. But this is why these idiots at the Lieutenant Governor's office were being so duplicitous, because I think they were hiding this. I don't believe that they ever thought this would surface and be revealed like it is. And the only reason it is because Phil Lyman and his campaign, raising the alarm that something was wrong. And then they do an audit, and when you read it in the media, it's like, oh, we're going to do this audit to show that Phil Lyman was wrong. He wasn't wrong. And I've told you guys before in updates, like I kind of alluded to here, all I was doing is helping somebody with a grammar request, and I was going to invest an hour of my time on this issue and help somebody get a list from Southern Utah. And I've now invested hours and hours of time on this because I'm captivated by the fact that there is corruption going on. And I'm offended that people will call Natalie Clausen and Phil Lyman names that they're just conspiracy theorists. And by the way, in my mind, a conspiracy theorist is just somebody who's searching for the truth anyways. So anybody, and the problem is anybody who thinks that that's what they are, they're not going to watch this video. But maybe, if you know anybody like that, you can share it with them. But at least if you're interested in this topic, you understand that this is solid evidence. That we're not talking about theories anymore. This is the proof right here that these guys cheated, that the attorney general's and the attorney general was involved in it. Now, let me just show you this letter here. I got this through a grammar request, And the significance of it is that it's dated March 18th. And so what happens is that again, remember, Cox turns his signatures in February 20th, and by March 15th, they verified all of them and they're done. Well, they knew right away, apparently, that his signatures, a number of them were fraudulent, because in here, Ryan Cowley is sending an email back to the elections manager in Davis County. He says, Lori, in reading the code, and they're talking about some ID issues with the people turning in packets. And he said, that being said, given the ongoing investigations regarding forgeries and circular ID fraud, it is in there. And he goes on. My point is, they knew the instant Cox turned in his signatures, because he was the first one, they knew that they had problems on their hands. And remember, the first video that I did in this series called The Cover Up had to do with the fact that this little liar, Daniel Burton, and I know, I know him, a number of people know him, but I couldn't look him in the face now because he's a liar. And there's other instances that he's been caught lying and stuff. And so, the problem is with the new attorney general, he's probably going to keep Burton there. But this is the kind of, this is where Burton says, I can confirm that the office has no records of an investigation pertaining to signatures gathering nominating petitions for Spencer Cox. And that turns out to be a big fat lie. So essentially, I just told you what, how it went down, that I told you the dates that, and like I pointed out in a previous update, these signature packets were moving back and forth between these offices freely. And when I, use that analogy early on about the back of the house, this is what's going on in the back of the house. Because in the front of the house, they're telling us a whole different story. But this is the conspiracy here, if you want to use that word, that's going on. So with that backdrop in mind, let's go through some of the information that we were getting, again, in the front of the house. On June 19th, this is a letter that Cowley sends to Natalie Clausen, who's a candidate for lieutenant governor. And essentially, he lies to her. He tells her, here, these are the numbers for Governor Cox. And he says that, that he had 592 unreviewed signatures. We know that's a lie. And there's probably, based on what I've read, there's thousands of signatures that are unaccounted for, that are not put into that VISTA system. And to me, that's illegal. And so here you have the elections manager lying to a candidate on behalf of his boss, like this validity rate. That's wrong, because they took numbers out. Had they kept those in, they would have had a lower validity rate. And let me give you a quick example. Years ago, this was probably like 20 years ago, my nephew was living with me, and he was in middle school, and some friends of his came over for dinner, and they had those, I can't remember what the statewide test was at the time, but all the middle schools in the state of Utah had to do a statewide test. And his friends came over, were talking about some field trip they went on. And I said, well, you didn't go on a field trip today. They go, yeah. And I said, Ryan, what happened to you? He said, no, well, I took the test. I didn't know there was a field trip. And so anyways, I ended up finding out that in our middle school, they had pulled the, people, the students that they believed had low scores, and took them on a field trip. And then they ended up, and that boosted their numbers percentage-wise of, who they, of the students that they tested. Same thing here. If you're going to pull thousands of signatures that are bad, then you've artificially inflated this validity rate. And then, so essentially he lied to her. And you see here, the other odd thing is that remains to be seen is that he tells her that there's 592 unreviewed signatures, and here the auditors are actually saying there's 492. So we're missing 100. And then with their footnote, they tell us that it sounds like then 100 of these signatures of his unreviewed ones are actually fraudulent. So anyways, June 21st, remember this article, Governor candidate Phil Lyman calls for audit into Governor Spencer Cox's signatures. And you know what you should do for fun, I've done it, is go look at social media during that time period and just look how they make talk about Phil Lyman like he's a fool. And you know, people owe him an apology at the very least. By the way, speaking of owing somebody an apology, I owe Leatham here an apology, because now I think he was telling the truth. And I think I called him a liar in a previous update. But you see here that he says that Cox has thousands of extra signatures that we've collected just to be safe, to make sure that he has more than he needs to qualify. Now, today, that makes sense. If somebody's going to pay you close to $300,000 to gather 28,000 signatures, you would get thousands of extra signatures. I think that what happened is Leatham doesn't know at the time, you know, he knows that you know, he met the threshold, but he probably didn't know what they were showing as the unreviewed ones. He probably had no idea that Callie was telling people he only had 592 unreviewed, because Leatham thought that these thousands of extra signatures that he knows that were turned in, he has no idea that the clerk pulled them from the entire verification system and sent them back to Governor Cox. Looky here, McKinsey could not immediately confirm how many signatures in total were provided by Gather Inc. in the gubernatorial race. Now, before this audit came out 3 weeks ago, I mentioned this in a previous update and said, that's just odd. Why would McKinsey not tell us? He has to know. If he knows these numbers up here, then he has to know what the total amount was. Well, now I see why he didn't say it, because he was okay with, you know, he would have to contradict Leatham, or at least spill the beans that, oh, well, all those extra signatures, we didn't count them. They're not, you know, we did something else with them. We took them out of the entire system or verification process. So you see here, he writes this letter, or on June 21st, and I think the words I used before is that he wants to come across as he's so noble and righteous. He's not. He's a liar. Now that we have, with the backdrop of this latest audit, when he says all petition packets were delivered directly to Davis County Clerk, that part's probably true. Petitions were date stamped and recorded on petition submission forms, a copy of which was provided to the person who submitted all petitions. He says all petitions remain in the custody of Davis County Clerk personnel throughout the verification process. That's a lie. He goes on to say, if a signature was valid, it was counted towards a candidate. If a signature was invalid, it was rejected, and a reason for the rejection was recorded. So here's what I want to point out. These signatures that were rejected, 4,877, we can break them down into these categories. And the reason we know that is because we have a list, and we could sort them, and we could find out these are the reasons why they were rejected. So these are the signatures that they documented, that they declared valid or invalid, or in this case, these are the signatures they declared invalid, and they did this in a transparent and orderly manner. The problem is there's thousands of signatures that were not documented, that they try to hide from us. And so when he says here, if a signature was valid, it was counted towards a candidate. If it was invalid, it was rejected, and the reason for rejection was recorded. That's a lie. They didn't record it, because the only way to record it is in the Vista system, and that didn't happen. And here you have John Dougal. I don't think he was lying. I think he was misled. But he says that the validators review each signature to validate that the person who signed the petition is, and he goes through the list. They did not do that for each signature. In fact, they skipped all these things and just eyeballed the signature and took it out of the validation process, which in my opinion is illegal. This thing here and I said this before, I thought it was odd that on June 19th, when Callie sends an email to Natalie Clausen, who's a candidate for lieutenant governor, he says that the Cox-Henderson campaign submitted 592 additional signatures that were not verified once the required 28,000 signature threshold was met on March 18th. Had more signatures been needed, the campaign had an extra month, April 15th, to supplement its signature submission to secure a place in the primary election. So I always thought that was bizarre. I remember the day I read it. I think I called Natalie and I said, "That's weird. Why would you say that? You only say that if you didn't get if you didn't get the right amount of signatures," which is true. They didn't. But then I say, here it is again. John Dougal repeats this thing. Cox had ample time to collect additional signatures had the validators indicated more were needed to meet the statutory threshold. So I hope you see the lie here that had the validators indicated more were needed. The validators didn't have to tell them anything. They knew that they were short. They knew that because McKinsey was sending them back thousands of fraudulent signatures. They knew that, and this is, again, goes to my whole analogy from the beginning, the back of the house versus the front of the house. The front of the house, they want us to believe this propaganda they're putting out there, and that they have the state auditor repeat that, oh, well, it's okay even if he's short. Well, yeah, he was short. The state auditor told us he was short. The ledge auditors told us he was short. But then they qualify it with this, oh, but had he been told, he could have gotten more. My point is, he didn't have to be told anything. He knew. They knew in real time that they were short signatures because McKinsey was sending them back the signatures. This is the problem going on in the back of the house that we've just unmasked, that this kind of narrative doesn't work. And we see the ledge auditors saying the same thing. Candidates fulfill the requirements given to them. Well, actually they didn't. And they point out here, each candidate followed the rules and process that were asked of them. This includes Administrative Rule 623-4, which stipulates that candidates cannot submit more signatures after they have met the 28,000 validated signature threshold. Thus, while each candidate had extra signatures, they could not have supplemented them further unless they were told that they had not reached the signature threshold. I'm just saying, Cox didn't have to be told anything. They were aware in real time. This is, we got that email that I showed you from Callie. They knew that an investigation was going on. They knew that they were pulling thousands of signatures from the packets. They were pulling packets, literal packets, from Cox's submissions and sending them back to themselves, or the clerk was sending it to them, or else some of them went to the AG's office. This is ridiculous. This is a lie. We were lied to by Callie, by the state auditor. Whether he did it on purpose or not, I don't know. And then here we have the ledge auditors repeating the same narrative. I'm going to close with this. This is the front of the house. Let's end with the front of the house. And I want you to hear this, man. This is one of the most dishonest and slimiest public officials that I know today. This guy, Brian McKenzie. I mean, and if you live in Davis County, you should hopefully he doesn't run again, but if he does, you got to get rid of him. You got to get somebody to run against him, and you got to make sure he doesn't run for office again. He's bad news. He's at ground zero of all this mess. And I want you to listen to him and keep in mind that in some of the hearings I heard that ballots are equivalent to signatures. And I want you to hear the front of the house, how they do this public relations counteroffensive, telling us how secure everything is, and they have this monkey telling us about it. And because we're dumb, we really are stupid that these are the people we're going to listen to give us assurance that our election system has integrity.
Hello, my name is Brian McKenzie, and I'm the county clerk here in Davis County. Sometimes I'm asked whether or not our voting machines can be hacked. That would require knowledge, time, and access. As an election official, my job is to prevent that access. All ballots are processed in secure election facilities. These areas are protected from unauthorized access. They're also under 24/7 video surveillance. A really wonderful thing that we have in Utah as well is that the public can come in and observe each of these processes and how ballots are being handled. If you'd like to learn more about what processes are in place to keep Utah's elections safe, contact your county clerk. Go in for a visit and see for yourself.